The bottle of whiskey felt cold in my hands. Colder than it should have. It was a limited edition. Something collectors would kill for. I just never imagined my own son would take that phrase so literally. This bottle. This gift for my 68th birthday. Wasn't meant for celebration. It was meant to be my last drink. This is the story of how a birthday gift turned into an attempted murder investigation. If you believe that the deepest betrayals deserve the strongest justice, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The old porch swing still complains with the same familiar groan it's had for 20 years. It's a sound that has marked the changing of the seasons for me. From the humid summer nights of my 50s to the crisp autumn evenings of my 60s. It used to be the backdrop to a glass of whiskey, the satisfying clinking of ice against the rim, and the low, comforting murmur of my wife Eleanor's voice as she talked about which of her roses were blooming. Now, it's just the groan, and the ceramic warmth of a coffee mug cradled in my hands. The coffee is decaf. Another one of the many small surrenders you make after your heart decides to stage a violent protest inside your own chest. The doctors were very clear 3 years ago. After the surgery, no more stress. No more sleepless nights fueled by worry. And absolutely, unequivocally, no more whiskey. I've learned to live with it. Mostly, the quiet that Eleanor left behind, once a cavern of grief, has softened into a familiar space. Some days, it's a comfort, a thick blanket on a cool Ohio evening. On nights like this, though, watching the last sliver of the sun dip below the oak trees, it's just empty. The silence doesn't soothe, it echoes. I was tracing the rim of my mug, lost in the memory of Eleanor's laughter, when the silence was shattered, not by a car backfiring or a neighbor's dog, but by the sharp, impatient ring of the doorbell. It rang twice. A demanding jab of sound. I don't get many visitors. My world has shrunk. A deliberate and necessary contraction after Eleanor passed and my heart failed. My friends are few but solid, and they always call first. Setting the mug down on the worn wooden railing, its surface smooth from years of resting my arms there. I pushed myself up. My knees popped. My back protested. Aging is a slow, methodical process of betrayal by your own body. I walked through the house. My footsteps muffled by the runner in the hall Eleanor had insisted on buying. The floorboards sighed under my weight as I reached the front door and pulled it open, expecting maybe a local kid selling magazine subscriptions. But there was nothing, just the evening air, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the promise of rain. I was about to close the door, chalking it up to a neighborhood prank, when my eyes caught something on the welcome mat. It was a plain brown box, perfectly square, wrapped in simple craft paper. No ribbon, no frills. It looked anonymous, almost sterile. I scanned the street, but it was empty. The houses across the way, settling into their evening routines, their windows glowing with warm light. Bending down with a grunt, I picked it up. It was heavy, a solid, dense weight that felt important. I carried it inside and set it on the polished surface of the dining room table, the table we'd only ever used for holidays. I stood over it for a moment, a strange sense of unease prickling the back of my neck. Taped to the top was a small, white envelope, my name Rodney written on it. I slid it open with my thumb. Inside was a simple card, the kind you buy in a pack of 10 at the drugstore. On it, in a familiar, messy scrawl that was a chaotic mix of print and cursive, were 3 words, "Happy Birthday." My breath hitched. The air seemed to turn to lead in my lungs. I knew that handwriting, as well as I knew my own. It was a violent, impatient script. The letters leaning so far forward they looked like they were about to fall over. I'd seen it on countless homework assignments he'd rushed through, on hastily written apology notes after he'd broken a window, on the back of the birthday checks I'd given him every year for 2 decades. It was Tyler's, my son. A small, stupid part of my heart, the part that refuses to learn, gave a hopeful flutter. 3 years. 3 years of punishing silence after the fight. A fight about money. As it always was. A fight about his choices. His refusal to take responsibility. His wife Sarah's key at desperation. It had ended with him shouting that I was a controlling old man who'd been holding him back his entire life. And then, nothing. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a Christmas card. Until now, maybe this was it. An olive branch. An apology. Wrapped in brown paper. With hands that were not quite steady, I tore the paper off the box. I was careful, as if the contents were fragile, as if my hope itself was fragile. Inside, nestled in a bed of crinkling shredded paper, was a bottle, and my hope died instantly, replaced by a cold, sickening plunge in the pit of my stomach. It was a bottle of Oak Hollow Reserve, cask strength. I'm no longer a connoisseur, but the memory of a good bourbon is etched into my soul. I knew what this was. This was a collector's item, a status symbol, a bottle that people wait on lists for, a bottle that costs more than my first car did, back in '78. It was a work of art. The whiskey inside a deep, rich amber, the label embossed with gold leaf. It practically glowed under the dining room light, and it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever given me. It felt like a physical blow. He knew. Of all the people in the world who knew about my cardiologist's name, about the pills I take twice a day, about the life I was forced to live now. It was him. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a sharpened stick poked directly into a wound. It was a silent, venomous way of saying, "Here is everything you can no longer have. Here is a reminder of the man you used to be. The man who was stronger. The man who was whole." This wasn't a gift of reconciliation. It was a gift of breathtaking, chilling indifference. I remembered a time, years ago, when he was just 21, and I'd poured him his first proper drink from my own collection. We'd sat on that same porch swing, and I'd told him that a fine whiskey was meant to be respected, to be sipped and savored. He had looked me in the eye and said he understood. Clearly, he hadn't. The shrill ring of my phone sliced through the heavy silence. I flinched, my hand flying to my chest out of instinct. I saw the caller ID and a wave of relief washed over me. Jim Peterson. Rodney. Happy birthday. You old goat. Jim's voice was a balm, a warm and rumbling sound that was as solid and dependable as the man himself. He was Tyler's father-in-law, a connection that had grown increasingly awkward over the past 3 years. But our own friendship had predated their marriage. He was a good man, a true man, the kind who'd show up with a toolbox and a six-pack if you even mentioned a leaky faucet. Thanks, Jim. It's good to hear from you. Just wanted to make sure you weren't getting into too much trouble on your 68th. Sarah and the kids say hi. And hey, don't forget, you promised to let me take a look at that loose shingle on your porch roof before the next big rain. Weather report says we might get a storm this weekend. I looked out the kitchen window, at the familiar slope of the porch roof. Then my eyes drifted back to the bottle sitting on my table, a gleaming monument to my son's cruelty. An idea began to form, a way to take this ugly, painful thing and scrub it clean, a way to turn this poison, this emotional poison, into an antidote. You know what? Jim, I said, my voice finding a new firmness. The weekend looks clear. Why don't you come by tomorrow afternoon? I've got something for you. A proper thank you for always looking out for me. The next afternoon, Jim showed up right on time, his beat-up Ford truck rattling to a stop in my driveway. He spent a solid hour on a ladder, whistling off-key as he hammered and sealed. When he was done, he came inside, smelling of sunshine and hard work, and accepted a tall glass of iced tea. All fixed, he said with a proud grin. Should hold up through the winter now. You just call me if it gives you any more trouble. I can't thank you enough. Jim, here. I retrieved a heavy gift bag from the counter and handed it to him. He peered inside, and his eyebrows shot up to his hairline. Rodney. Are you kidding me? This is Oak Hollow Reserve. I've only ever seen this in glass cases in fancy liquor stores. I can't take this. You absolutely can. I insisted, my voice leaving no room for argument. It was a corporate gift. You know how those things are. But I can't touch the stuff anymore. And it would be a mortal sin to let it just sit on a shelf collecting dust. A whiskey like that is meant to be drunk. You'll appreciate it more than I ever could. Please. Jim. It would make me happy. He finally relented, a smile spreading across his face that was as genuine as the sunrise. He shook my hand, his grip firm and calloused, and left with the bottle tucked under his arm. I watched his truck disappear down the street, feeling a profound sense of relief. I had taken Tyler's cold gesture and transformed it into a genuine act of gratitude. I had taken the power back. That night, for the first time in a long while, I went to bed feeling something akin to peace. The phone call came just after midnight. The sound ripped me from a shallow, dreamless sleep, and my heart hammered against my ribs with a painful, familiar rhythm before I even knew who was calling. It was Sarah, Jim's wife, and she was hysterical, her words tripping over each other in a torrent of panic. Rodney, it's Jim, oh God. Rodney. He's in the hospital. The world tilted. The peaceful feeling of a few hours ago dissolving into icy dread. What, Sarah? Slow down. What happened? He collapsed. He came home. He was so happy with the whiskey you gave him. He was so excited. He poured one glass. Rodney. Just one. And he started choking. He couldn't breathe. Her voice broke into a raw, ragged sob. The ambulance came. The doctors, they're saying it's some kind of poisoning. I don't remember grabbing my keys or putting on my shoes. The drive to the hospital was a blur of headlights and street signs that made no sense. All I remember is the suffocatingly sterile smell of disinfectant and the cold, humming fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area. I found Sarah crumpled in a plastic chair, her face streaked with tears. A doctor, a young woman with eyes that held far too much exhaustion for her age, explained it to us in a low, clinical voice. Acute poisoning, she said. The words hung in the air, thick and unbelievable. Something aggressive, fast-acting. His respiratory system is failing. We're doing everything we can. I stood there, feeling the cold linoleum floor through the soles of my shoes. Poisoning. The whiskey. Tyler's gift. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture so monstrous, so utterly unthinkable, that my mind physically recoiled from it. No, it can't be. A coincidence. A tainted batch from the factory. It has to be. On the drive home, hours later, my car felt like a coffin on wheels. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. My knuckles white. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Affrontique. Angry sound in the crushing silence. I glanced at the screen. It was Tyler. After 3 years of silence, he was calling me for the second time in 24 hours. My hand trembled as I hit the answer button and put it on speaker. My heart pounding, a dangerous rhythm against my ribs. "Hey, Dad." His voice was calm. Casual. Too casual. It was the voice of someone making a routine call. Not someone who hadn't spoken to his father in years. Just calling to wish you a happy birthday again. Hope it was a good one. I couldn't form words. The lie was a stone in my throat. "Did you enjoy your gift?" he asked. That was it. That was the question. Not, did you get my gift or did you like my gift, but did you enjoy it? There was a slight pause before the word enjoy. A tiny, infinitesimal hesitation that was filled with a world of unspoken, venomous meaning. He was asking if I had used it. He was asking if I was dead. My voice came out as a raw, ragged whisper, barely audible over the hum of the engine. I gave it to Jim. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. A vacuum that sucked all the air out of the car. It was a dead, heavy silence that stretched for 1 second. Then 2. Then 3. It was the sound of a carefully laid plan. A murderer's plan, shattering into a million pieces. Then, his voice came back. It was no longer calm. It was a low, guttural snarl, stripped of all pretense, vibrating with a rage, so pure it felt like I could feel the heat of it through the phone. "You did what?" The line went dead. The click of him hanging up was as loud as a gunshot in the night. I sat there in the darkness of my car, parked in my own driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. The streetlights painted stripes across the dashboard, and in that chilling, profound silence, I knew the horrific, unthinkable truth settled over me, not like a shroud, but like a sheet of ice. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a tainted batch. My son, the boy I had raised, had just tried to murder me, and he had just confessed. For a long time, I just sat there in the driver's seat, the engine of my car ticking like a time bomb in the crushing silence of my garage. The phone was dark in the cup holder. The world outside my windshield was the familiar, comforting sight of my own home. But it was as if I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The cheerful yellow front door. The flower pots Eleanor had insisted on. The neatly trimmed lawn, it was all a facade. A stage set for a horror play. I didn't know I was the star of My son had tried to murder me. The thought didn't crash into me like a wave. It seeped in. A slow, cold poison of its own, numbing my limbs, chilling the marrow in my bones. His voice echoed in my head. Not the angry snarl at the end, but the calm, casual question before it. Did you enjoy your gift? The premeditation, the sheer, icy calculation of it, was what buckled my knees. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an execution, planned and patiently awaited. Finally, my body moved. A clumsy, disconnected series of actions. I killed the engine. My hand shaking so violently, I missed the ignition on the first try. I stumbled out of the car, locking it with a beep that sounded obscenely loud in the quiet night. Inside the house, I didn't turn on the lights. I moved through the familiar darkness, my hand trailing along the wall for guidance, and shot the deadbolt on the front door. The metallic thunk was a pathetic sound, a child's defense against a monster that was already inside. I did the same to the back door, then walked through the house, checking the latch on every single window. My breath held tight in my chest. My home, my sanctuary for 40 years, now felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. My eyes fell on the kitchen counter. There it was, the bottle of Oak Hollow Reserve. It was sitting next to the coffee maker, 3/4 full. Jim had only had one glass, one nearly fatal glass. The beautiful amber liquid, the elegant label, it all looked different now. It wasn't a luxury item anymore. It was a weapon. It was a snake coiled in glass, waiting. I grabbed a large Ziploc bag from the drawer, the kind meant for storing leftovers, and, using a dish towel so I wouldn't touch it, I carefully placed the bottle inside and sealed it. I hid it in the back of the dark, musty pantry, behind a wall of canned goods and forgotten wedding gifts. Out of sight, but not out of my mind. Sleep was an impossibility. I sat in my worn armchair in the living room, the house shrouded in darkness, and I watched the hours crawl by on the cable box clock. Every time a car passed, its headlights would sweep across the walls, and my heart would leap into my throat. I was a prisoner in my own home, terrified of my own son. The night was a long, slow torture of memory. I saw Tyler as a little boy, his hand tucked in mine, looking up at me with so much trust it hurt to remember. I saw him as a teenager, all awkward limbs and simmering resentment. I saw him on his wedding day, handsome in a suit that I had paid for, smiling, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Where did I go wrong? What seed of darkness had I failed to see in him? The questions were a merciless chorus, and I had no answers. As the first, too faint gray light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, a new feeling started to push through the fear, a cold, hard anger. He was not going to get away with this. He had tried to take my life, and he had nearly taken the life of a good classed, innocent man. The helplessness of the night began to burn away, replaced by a grim resolve. I needed proof. My word against his wouldn't be enough. He would twist it, lie, make me out to be a confused, vindictive old man. My mind raced. How did he do it? The bottle was sealed when I got it. He must have used a syringe, a tiny needle through the cork. He would have needed something to put the poison in, something small he could carry, use, and dispose of. The trash. I moved with a sudden urgency, my stiff joints forgotten. I went to the kitchen and pulled the garbage can from under the sink. The bag was only half full. I untied it and, with a feeling of disgust, I carefully upended its contents onto a spread of old newspapers on the floor. Coffee grounds, an empty milk carton, junk mail, vegetable peelings. I sifted through the day's refuse, piece by piece, and then I saw it, tucked inside a crumpled paper towel, almost invisible, was a small glass vial. It was no bigger than my thumb, completely empty. With a black screw-on cap, there was no label, no markings of any kind. It was anonymous, disposable. It was perfect. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was something real. I carefully picked it up with a pair of tweezers from the medicine cabinet, placed it in its own small sandwich bag, and set it on the counter. A tiny piece of damning evidence. I spent the next hour at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, my eyes fixed on the little vial. A plan was forming. I had the bottle. I had this. I would call the police. I would tell them everything. But the world had one more cruel twist for me. I had to use the bathroom. And when I came back to the kitchen, not 5 minutes later, it was gone. I blinked, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The spot on the counter where the Ziploc bag had been was empty. I scanned the entire kitchen, my heart starting to pound with a frantic, wild terror. It wasn't there. I rushed to the back door. It was still locked. The front door, still deadbolted. Then I saw it. The window over the kitchen sink, the one with the slightly faulty latch that I'd been meaning to fix for months, was pushed open just a crack. A cool morning breeze whispered into the room, carrying the scent of damp earth. He had been here. He had been in my house. While I was here, the blood drained from my face. I backed away from the window, a strangled noise escaping my throat. He had been watching me. He knew I'd found the vial. He had waited for his moment, slipped in as silent as a ghost, and stolen the only piece of direct evidence I had. The fear I'd felt last night was a pale imitation of this. This was a violation. This was a direct, terrifying message I can get to you whenever I want. You are not safe anywhere. For a moment, I was paralyzed. Mi resolve crumbled, replaced by a primal, animal fear. But then the anger returned, roaring back to life. Hotter than before. He had overplayed his hand. He had shown me how scared he was. He had confirmed everything. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. There was only one person I could call: Leo Vance. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Leo and I had worked together at the same engineering firm for 30 years before we both retired. He was a man of science, a man of facts and logic. He didn't deal in emotions or speculation. He dealt in proof. Leo, it's Rodney. I need your help. I can't explain over the phone, but it's a matter of life and death. There was a pause. Leo was not a man given to hyperbole, and he knew I wasn't either. Where are you? He asked, his voice suddenly serious. I'm at home, but I can come to you. Are you at your workshop? I'll be there in 30 minutes. Leo's workshop was in his basement, a meticulously organized space filled with beakers, microscopes, and complex equipment he used for his hobby soil and water analysis for local farms. It smelled of ozone and clean metal. He was waiting for me, his face etched with concern. I hadn't brought the bottle. I couldn't risk walking around with it. Instead, I had used a clean medicine dropper to extract a small sample of the whiskey, placing it in a sealed, sterile jar. I handed it to him without a word. He took the jar, looked at the amber liquid inside, then looked at me. Rodney, what in God's name is going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. And so, I told him. I told him everything. The gift, Jim in the hospital, the phone call, the empty vial that was now gone. I laid the whole insane story out for him, my voice low and steady, too afraid that if I let any emotion in, I would shatter. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When I was finished, he just stared at the jar in his hand. "Are you saying," he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of my accusation, "that you think your son, your boy Tyler, I tried to poison you?" "I don't think it, Leo," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I know it." He nodded slowly, then turned to his equipment. "This is highly irregular. Rodney, I'm not a state-certified lab for this kind of thing." He looked back at me. At the desperation that must have been plain on my face, he sighed, "But I trust you, and you're my friend. Give me a few hours. I'll run it through the spectrometer. I'll have to do it off the books, but I'll get you an answer." Leaving Leo's workshop, I felt a flicker of hope, but I knew I couldn't wait. I drove straight to the police station. The building was old and smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. The officer at the front desk was a young man with a bored expression who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I explained that I needed to report an attempted murder. His boredom immediately evaporated, replaced by a wary skepticism. "Okay, sir," he said, pulling out a form. "Let's start from the beginning. Who attempted to murder whom?" "My son," I said. "He tried to murder me." The officer's pen stopped moving. He looked up at me, his eyes doing a quick scan, probably checking for signs of dementia or drunkenness. "Your son. I see. And how did he allegedly do this?" "He sent me a bottle of poisoned whiskey for my birthday." "A bottle of poisoned whiskey," he repeated, his voice flat. "Okay, sir. And you have this bottle." "It's at my house, but a friend of mine is testing a sample of it right now." "A friend," he said, nodding slowly, the disbelief radiating from him in waves. "And why didn't you bring this bottle with you?" "Because I'm afraid my son might try to steal it. Just like he stole the other piece of evidence from my house this morning." My voice was rising, laced with a frustration that bordered on hysteria. I was losing him. I could see it in his eyes. To him, I was just another crackpot, another sad old man with a family dispute. Just as he was about to give me some dismissive platitude and send me on my way, a woman's voice cut in from the doorway. "What's going on here?" "Officer Miller." She was a woman in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. She wore a detective's badge on her belt. "I'm Detective Rossi." The young officer looked relieved. "This gentleman, detective, is reporting that his son tried to poison him with a bottle of birthday whiskey." Detective Rossi's gaze settled on me. It was an unnervingly direct look, assessing and analytical. But unlike the officer, she wasn't dismissing me. She was reading me. "Why don't you come with me, sir?" she said, her voice even. "Let's talk in my office." Her office was a small, cluttered cubicle, but it was private. For the next hour, I told her everything, just as I had told Leo. She let me speak, only interrupting to ask clarifying questions. "What exactly did he say on the phone? Describe the vial you found. When was the last time you saw your son before this?" She asked about my relationship with Tyler. I found myself telling her things I hadn't admitted to anyone. I told her about his sense of entitlement, his string of failed business ideas that I was always expected to finance, the growing distance after Eleanor died. I spoke not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness that felt like it had settled deep in my bones. I was painting a portrait of my son, and with every word, the image of a murderer came into sharper focus. When I was done, she was silent for a long moment, tapping a pen on her notepad. It's a compelling story. Mr. Miller, she said finally, but right now, that's all it is. A story. Without the vial, and without a certified lab report on that whiskey, my hands are tied. All I have is your word against his She stood up. A clear dismissal. Get me something concrete, and we can move forward. Until then, be careful. I walked out of the station feeling colder and more alone than ever. The system wasn't going to help me. Not yet. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I existed in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every noise. My phone clutched in my hand, waiting for Leo's call. The world outside my windows seemed menacing. I felt watched. On the third day, I learned that I went out to get the morning paper, and as I bent down, my eyes caught something tucked under the welcome mat. It was a Polaroid photograph. My blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. The picture was dark and grainy, taken from a distance. It was a photo of my own front porch, taken at night. The light from my living room window cast a faint, lonely glow. There was no one in the photo. There was no message, but the implication was as clear as a scream in the night. I am watching you. I can get to you. You are not safe. I stumbled back inside. The photograph clutched in my hand and leaned against the closed door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This was his response to me going to the police. This was him. Escalating. This was a threat. Just then, my phone rang. The screen flashed with an unknown number. My heart seized, thinking it was him. But the voice on the other end was blessedly familiar. Rodney. It's Leo. His voice was different. The friendly gruffness was gone, replaced by a grim, clinical tone. I'm done. You need to listen to me very carefully. Are you sitting down? Just tell me. Leo. It's not just contaminated. Rodney. It's not a bad batch. The sample you gave me is saturated with pure, concentrated white snake root alkaloid. It's an old, vicious poison. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They processed it to remove the taste and smell. The dosage in that sample, Rodney. It's enough to kill a horse, or a man with a heart condition. The world seemed to stop spinning. There it was. The proof. The concrete. Undeniable. Scientific proof. The fear that had been my constant companion for 3 days was suddenly burned away by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. The Polaroid was still in my other hand. A threat from the monster. But now, in my ear, was the weapon I would use to destroy him. I thanked Leo. My voice hoarse. I hung up and immediately dialed the number on Detective Rossi's card, my fingers moving with a speed and certainty I hadn't felt in years. She answered on the second ring. Detective Rossi. It's Rodney Miller, I said, my voice tight and urgent, leaving no room for doubt or dismissal. I have your proof. I have the lab results. And I have a direct threat from my son that was delivered to my doorstep this morning. There was a pause on the other end of the line. But this time it was different. It wasn't skepticism. It was the sound of a professional calculating her next move. Stay where you are. Mr. Miller, don't touch anything else, she said, her voice now sharp and commanding. I'm coming to you. And we have enough to get a warrant. The click of Detective Rossi's call ending was a definitive, metallic sound that echoed in the profound silence of my house. For a single, suspended moment, the world felt still. The terror that had been a frantic lozenge, the R1 time, fluttering bird in my chest for days, was suddenly caged, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. It was the calm of inevitability. The gears of a great and terrible machine had begun to turn, set in motion by my own hand. And there was no stopping them now. I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorframe, the Polaroid of my porch still clutched in one hand. It felt slick with sweat. In the other, my phone felt impossibly heavy. A direct line to a future I couldn't yet imagine. I looked around my living room, at the comfortable armchair where Eleanor and I had read for thousands of hours, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, Tyler on his first day of school, Tyler at his high school graduation, Tyler and Sarah cutting their wedding cake. They were relics from a different life. A different man. A different boy. It felt like I was standing in a museum dedicated to a family that no longer existed. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I made coffee, my hands moving with a mechanical slowness, my mind a million miles away. I watched the steam rise from the mug and thought of the steam rising from the vents of a police car. I buttered a piece of toast and thought of the cold, sterile feel of handcuffs. Every mundane action was overlaid with a horrific, vivid imagining of what was happening across town. With every siren I heard in the distance, my stomach would clench. Is that them? Is it happening now? I was a ghost in my own home, waiting for news of an exorcism. I was waiting for them to cast out my son. Just before sunrise, the phone rang again. It was Rossi. The warrant was executed at 6 a.m. Mr. Miller, she said. Her voice, all business, devoid of any emotion. Tyler Miller was taken into custody without incident. We're at the station now. I think you should come down. The drive to the station was surreal. The sun was rising, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold. People were jogging, walking their dogs, heading to work. The world was carrying on as normal, oblivious to the fact that my own personal world had just ended. This time, I wasn't a supplicant begging to be heard. I was escorted through a secure door into the heart of the station. A maze of desks and ringing phones. Rossi led me to a small, windowless interview room. It was cold, and the air was stale. She placed a cup of what smelled like burnt coffee in front of me and sat down opposite. He was surprised. She began, leaning forward, her eyes locked on mine, completely blindsided. He did exactly what we expected him to do. He played the victim. He was outraged, indignant. He threatened to sue every officer on the scene for harassment. He demanded to know who would make such a ridiculous, slanderous accusation against him. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I could picture it perfectly. Tyler's manufactured rage, his air of wounded pride. It was a performance I had seen many times on a much smaller stage. We started in the garage. Rossi continued, her voice a low, steady narration. Behind a stack of old tires, tucked away in a dusty cabinet, we found a box. It contained beakers, glass stirring rods, a small digital scale, and the desiccated remains of several plants. They're on their way to the lab for official identification. But our preliminary field test was positive for Agaritina altissima, white snake root. I closed my eyes. It was real. The abstract horror now had a physical form. I imagined Tyler in the garage, surrounded by the mundane clutter of lawnmowers and bicycles, carefully extracting poison like some medieval apothecary. But that's not the worst of it. Rodney, Rosie said, her use of my first name a small, deliberate act of empathy. The real discovery was in his home office. She slid a large, clear evidence bag across the metal table. Inside was a small, black, leather-bound notebook. It was the kind of thing a person might use to jot down thoughts or reminders. My blood ran cold. I knew that notebook. I had given it to him for Christmas 2 years ago. It was hidden, she said, inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. We found his notes, pages and pages of them. She opened a file and showed me the photocopies. It was Tyler's messy, impatient handwriting, but the content was chillingly methodical. There were notes on the plant's toxicity, on different extraction methods, on how to disguise the taste. There were calculations, little strings of numbers and chemical symbols. It was a diary of a murder in progress. Then, she turned to a specific page. She pushed the paper towards me. My eyes struggled to focus on the words. There were 2 letters, written in block capitals, followed by a dash and a measurement. FD, 15 milliliters. Underneath it, in parentheses, were more notes. History of cardiac arrhythmia. Post-MI. Standard dose likely sufficient. Do not exceed 20 milliliters to avoid detection of bitterness. FD. Frank Dalton. My full name. The name on my birth certificate. The name Eleanor had sometimes used when she was lovingly exasperated with me. He had researched me. He had researched my specific medical condition, my weakened heart, and he had calculated the precise, lethal dose required to kill me. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It felt as if a hand had reached through the table and squeezed my already damaged heart. This wasn't just a plan to kill an old man for his inheritance. This was personal. This was a son writing a recipe for his own father's death. I physically recoiled from the paper, pushing my chair back from the table. There's one more thing, Rosie said gently, giving me a moment to recover. She slid another evidence bag across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A letter, folded but never placed in an envelope. There was no salutation and no signature. It contained a single, chilling sentence. You'll understand why when it's all over. We found it in the same book, tucked inside the notebook. Rosie explained, we don't know who it was for. Maybe for his wife, maybe for you, maybe for no one. But it proves one thing beyond any doubt: premeditation. She told me he had been arrested and charged. He had made his one phone call to a high-priced defense attorney. His wife, Sarah, had been at the house during the raid. Rosie described her as being in a state of catatonic shock, her face a pale, blank mask as she watched them lead her husband away in handcuffs. The last thing she saw was Sarah sinking to her knees on the manicured front lawn, her entire world collapsing around her. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and procedural nightmares. The wheels of justice turn slowly, and they grind you down in the process. I met with the prosecutor, a sharp, determined woman named Maria Flores, who walked me through what would happen. The evidence was overwhelming, she assured me. But a courtroom was a theater, and Tyler's lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, was a master of performance. The day the trial began, the courtroom was packed. The air was thick with a morbid curiosity. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution's table. And then they brought him in, He wasn't in a jumpsuit, but a tailored suit. His hair was perfectly styled. He looked clean, prosperous, and wrongfully accused. He wouldn't look at me. He scanned the gallery, his eyes landing on Sarah and her parents on the other side of the aisle. His expression, one of wounded betrayal. It was a masterful FIL performance. Marcus Thorne's opening statement was brilliant in its audacity. He painted a picture of me as a bitter, controlling patriarch, a lonely old man who had always resented his son's independence. He claimed the fight we'd had 3 years ago was about me trying to sabotage Tyler's career. This poisoning, he argued, was a tragic accident, a contamination at the distillery, that a grief-stricken and vindictive father was now trying to pin on his own flesh and blood. It was a disgusting, twisted fantasy. But he said it with such conviction that I saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of one of the jurors. The first witness to be called was Jim Peterson. He looked older, frailer, but his voice was steady as he walked to the stand. He recounted the story of my birthday, of me giving him the bottle as a thank you. He described the taste of the whiskey, the sudden, terrifying constriction in his chest, the feeling of his body shutting down. He spoke with a simple, unadorned honesty that was more powerful than any legal rhetoric. When Thorne cross-examined him, trying to poke holes in his memory, Jim just looked at the jury and said, "Rodney is my friend. He saved my life by giving me that bottle, when it was meant for him." Then, it was my turn. The long walk from my seat to the witness stand felt like a mile. Every eye in the room was on me. I sat down, the wood of the chair hard and unforgiving, and swore the oath. Miss Flores led me through my story gently, methodically. The gift, the phone call, the fear, the vial, the Polaroid. Then, it was Thorne's turn. He approached the stand like a predator circling its prey. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice dripping with a synthetic sympathy, "you were not a fan of your son's career choices. Were you?" "I wanted him to be responsible." "You mean you wanted him to do what you wanted him to do?" He countered, "Isn't it true that you cut him off financially 3 years ago? Right when he was trying to launch a new startup. I stopped enabling his failures." "Yes." "And you've been angry ever since. Haven't you angry that he was succeeding without you? Angry that he built a life for himself that you couldn't control?" Each question was a jab, a deliberate attempt to paint me as the villain. My own anger, cold and hard, was a stone in my chest. But I held it down. I looked at the jury, at their searching, uncertain faces. I had to make them understand. "Mr. Miller," Thorne said, leaning in for the kill, "do you hate your son?" The question hung in the oppressive silence of the courtroom. I didn't look at Thorne. I looked at Tyler. For the first time, he met my gaze. In his eyes, I saw nothing, no remorse, no fear, just a cold, empty void. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the room, "I don't hate him." I took a breath, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm heartbroken by what he has become, and I am terrified of what he tried to do." The air went out of Thorne's attack. He had no follow-up. He mumbled, "No further questions," and retreated to his table. After I stepped down, Miss Flores began to build her case, brick by damning brick. She presented the official state lab report, confirming Leo's findings: a lethal concentration of white snakeroot alkaloid in the whiskey. She presented the Polaroid photograph, its menacing intimacy now exposed to the world. She brought in a digital forensics expert who testified that Tyler's work computer contained search histories for terms like odorless poisons, white snakeroot fatality rate, and how to bypass a bottle cork seal. And then, she brought out the notebook. She had it projected onto a large screen for the entire jury to see: the cold, methodical handwriting, the dosage calculations. She zoomed in on the entry that was now burned into my memory: FD, 15 milliliters. I heard a collective gasp from the gallery. The evidence is clear. Miss, Flores said, her voice ringing with conviction. But the defense would have you believe this is all a tragic misunderstanding. They want you to believe this was a father's grief-fueled fantasy. She paused, turning to the judge. The state has one final piece of evidence to present, Your Honor. A technician brought in a small audio system and placed a speaker on the witness stand. A tense, expectant silence fell over the courtroom. I knew what was coming. This, Miss, Flores announced, is a recording of a phone call made by the defendant to La Mila, to his father, Rodney Miller, on the night of his 68th birthday, the night that Jim Peterson was fighting for his life in the hospital. She nodded to the technician. There was a soft click, a burst of static, and then my son's voice filled the room. It was calm, casual, and utterly chilling. Hey, Dad. Just calling to wish you a happy birthday again. Hope it was a good one. There was a pause. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath. Did you? Enjoy your gift. I didn't look at Tyler. I didn't need to. I looked at the jury. I saw a woman in the front row bring her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. I saw a man in the back shake his head slowly, a look of utter disgust on his face. In that moment, listening to my son's voice hang in the air like a death sentence, I watched their faces change from skepticism to comprehension, from doubt to dawning. Absolute certainty. The silence that followed the recording was a physical thing. It pressed in on my eardrums, heavier and more profound than any sound. My son's casual, murderous question, did you enjoy your gift, hung in the air. An invisible specter of guilt that could not be cross-examined or dismissed. In that moment, the entire theater of the courtroom, the legal maneuvering, the performance of innocence, all of it collapsed into dust. All that was left was the naked, ugly truth, exposed for everyone to see. I risked a glance at Tyler. The mask was gone. The carefully constructed facade of the wronged son had shattered into a million pieces. What was left was something I had never truly allowed myself to see before, a face contorted with pure, undiluted hatred. His eyes, fixed on me, were not the eyes of a son. They were the eyes of a predator whose prey had unexpectedly, impossibly, escaped the trap. There was no remorse, no flicker of shame. There was only the furious, impotent rage of being caught. Marcus Thorne, his high-priced lawyer, seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He shuffled some papers, cleared his throat, but he had nothing. There was nothing left to say. Miss, Flores let the silence stretch, a masterful and merciless tactic. Before she walked back to her table, the prosecution rests. Your Honor, she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with the finality of a closing door. The closing arguments were a formality, thorns was weak, a half-hearted attempt to cast doubt where there was none. Miss Flores, by contrast, was devastating. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked the jury back through the evidence, piece by damning piece. The gift, the lie, the stolen vial, the research, the notebook, the photograph, and finally, the voice. She connected every dot with a calm, irrefutable logic until the picture of a cold-blooded, greedy son plotting his father's murder was the only possible conclusion. Then, the jury filed out, and the waiting began. The minutes stretched into an hour. Then, two. The courtroom emptied out, leaving only the key players suspended in a state of tense limbo. I sat on the hard wooden bench, feeling a profound exhaustion settle deep into my bones. Jim and Sarah sat with me, a silent, solid wall of support. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. Her own was cold as ice. Across the aisle, Tyler sat alone at the defense table, whispering furiously with his lawyer. He was agitated, his leg bouncing uncontrollably. The calm, confident man was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. When the bailiff finally announced that the jury had reached a verdict, a jolt went through the room. We all filed back in, our movements stiff and formal. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me as I took my seat. The jury entered, their faces grim and unreadable. I remembered something I'd read once: if the jury won't look at the defendant, it's over. One by one, they took their seats, and not a single one of them looked at my son. My heart, the one he had so carefully factored into his lethal calculations, began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. In the matter of the state versus Tyler Miller, the judge's voice boomed. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged man with a weary face, stood up. He held a single piece of paper in his trembling hand. We have, Your Honor. And what is your verdict? The foreman cleared his throat and unfolded the paper. He looked directly at the judge. On the charge of attempted murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Tyler Miller. He paused. And in that split second, a lifetime of memories flashed before my eyes. A chaotic slideshow of a boy I once knew. Guilty. The word didn't come with a crash of thunder, but with a quiet, solemn finality. A wave of something, not joy, not triumph, but a profound and shattering relief washed over me. I felt the tension I had been carrying in my shoulders for months. A solid, unyielding weight. Simply dissolve. A breath I didn't know I had been holding escaped my lungs in a long debria. Shaky sich. It was over. The truth had won. I watched as the color drained from Tyler's face. He staggered back a step, as if he'd been physically struck. He looked at his lawyer in disbelief, then at the jury, his expression curdling from shock into a mask of pure venom. And then, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. He leaned forward, and though he was flanked by 2 deputies who were already moving to restrain him, he mouthed 2 words at me. A silent, vicious promise, not over. He then spoke, his voice a low, menacing whisper that was meant only for me, but that I heard as clearly as if he had screamed it. This isn't the final chapter. The sentencing was scheduled for a week later. It was a somber, procedural affair. Character statements were read. Miss Flores spoke of the cold, calculating nature of the crime. Thorne spoke of his client's unblemished record and potential for rehabilitation. It was all noise. The only thing that mattered was the judge. He looked down at Tyler. Not with anger, but with a kind of weary disgust. The evidence in this case has revealed a chilling level of premeditation and a profound lack of conscience, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. You did not just attempt to take a life, you attempted to take the life of the man who gave you yours. For the basest of all motives, greed. This court finds that your actions represent a grave danger to society. He cleared his throat. Therefore, it is the sentence of this court that you, Tyler Miller, to be committed to the state penitentiary for a term of 25 years. You will not be eligible for parole for a minimum of 15 years. The gavel came down. The sound wasn't loud, but it was the most final sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a life. It was the sound of justice. Tyler didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face a stone mask. As the deputies cuffed his hands behind his back and led him away, he didn't look back. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. I took a deep breath. The first truly deep breath I had taken in months. The air was cool and clean, and it filled my lungs. The sounds of the city, the distant traffic, the chatter of passers-by were no longer menacing. They were just sounds. The world was normal again. Detective Rossi was waiting for me on the steps. She looked tired, but there was a small, satisfied smile on her face. She put a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Rodney, she said softly. You're safe now. I nodded, the words catching in my throat. I was safe, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it wasn't really over. The aftermath was a slow, quiet process of picking up the pieces. Sarah filed for divorce immediately. She came to see me a few weeks after the sentencing. We sat on the porch swing, the chain groaning with our shared weight. She was thin and pale, but her eyes held a new, steely resolve. I'm so sorry, Rodney, she whispered, her gaze fixed on her hands, which were twisting a damp tissue in her lap. For everything, for not seeing it, for defending him for so long, I was a fool. You weren't a fool, Sarah, I told her, my voice gentle. You were a wife. You loved him. I loved the man. I thought he was, she said, finally looking at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. That man never existed. I see that now. I'm selling the house. The kids and I are moving back to my parents' state. We need a fresh start. Somewhere no one knows our name. I nodded, a profound sadness settling over me for her. For my grandchildren who would now grow up without a father, marked by his monstrous legacy. Jim and his wife were there for her, a fortress of love and support. Our friendship, forged in the crucible of this nightmare, had become a quiet, unshakable bond. He came over once a week, and we didn't talk about Tyler. We talked about baseball, about the weather, about the repairs the old house needed. He fixed things. He helped me rebuild. And now, I'm back where I began. I'm sitting on the old porch swing. A mug of decaf coffee, now cold, resting in my hands. The shingle on the roof that Jim fixed is holding strong. The sun is setting, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and bruised purple. The world looks the same, but it is not. I am not the same. The court gave me justice. Detective Rossi gave me safety. But I've come to understand that peace is something entirely different. Peace is not something that is given to you. It's something you have to build yourself. Nail by nail. Board by board. Out of the wreckage of what came before. For a long time, I blamed myself. I replayed every argument, every harsh word, every disappointed sigh, searching for the exact moment I had failed, the moment he had broken. But I see now that his choices were his own. His darkness was his own. My only failure was in refusing to see it. Tyler's final, whispered threat. This isn't the final chapter, sometimes echoes in my mind on quiet nights. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps he will try to write another chapter in 15 years. But it won't be part of my story. His book is closed to me. The justice system locked the door. It is up to me not to stand there, waiting, with my ear pressed against it. I take a final sip of the cold coffee and stand up, my joints protesting with their familiar complaint. The porch swing groans one last time as I leave it. I walk across the porch, my footsteps steady on the old wooden planks. And I open the front door. The light from the living room spills out onto the porch. A warm, welcoming glow. I step inside, closing the door on the encroaching darkness of the evening. And I don't look back.